Thanks for joining us today. My name is Andrew Horner. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at ValidSoft. We deliver voice biometrics and authentication solutions to top brands around the world. We've seen a lot of momentum recently. It seems like everyone needs to be authenticated remotely. So I'm very happy to be here today with Matt Smallman, who's founder of Simnex Consulting, also works with Opus Research. We're going to talk today about the perfect storm, drivers and trends, and voice biometrics. Before we do that, and I'm going to revert back and forth between the PowerPoint, you'll see our talking faces mostly, but there's a few slides here. So the first one I just wanted to show everyone is, in case you missed it, there's been some content that we've published as ValidSoft recently, and then one piece that Opus published, and Matt was a key part of it. This is all available at validsoft.com/media-hub. So take a look at it. But we just pushed out a piece on 8 reasons to reconsider voice biometrics this year. So that's very timely. And then the Opus IntelliView for Voice Biometrics report, which featured ValidSoft as a leader. And then we just put out a fun piece today about if ValidSoft and voice biometrics had truly appropriately been applied to the script in Red Notice, it would have ruined the film. That's just a fun little read there. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing the screen. I'm going to introduce Matt, and happy to have you here, Matt. Thanks and welcome.
Thanks, Andrew.
Can you just, for those that don't know, some know you, some don't,
Yeah.
but can you give us a little bit of background on what brings you to this field and a little bit of your background?
I've probably been looking at this area specifically now for about 10 years. First off, leading contact center strategy and change for some of the largest banks in the UK. And that led me into this challenging area of contact center security and call center security, where it's a real barrier to the interactions that we want to have between customers and our agents. And over the last couple of years have been helping a whole wide range of organizations mostly implement voice biometric solutions, but in every case aiming to make their contact center experiences quicker, easier, and more secure. In the last couple of years then, I've also been working with Opus Research, providing them at the coalface experience necessary to get a perspective of what's happening in the market as well. And that's where you see my input into the recent IntelliView.
Yep, great. Awesome. Fantastic. Thanks so much. Well, let's just start with kind of a fun question, if that's all right. So, voice biometrics has been around a while. Other types of biometrics have been around a while. There's many different ways, from measuring how someone walks to taking DNA samples to retinal scans, which we see in the movies and things like that. But you've seen a lot in the space, especially on voice biometrics. But what's kind of most exciting to you at the moment? Why is this the perfect storm today?
There's a whole bunch of reasons. If I wind back a little bit, maybe almost 10 years ago, having just seen the truly transformational effect of this technology on experiences in some contact centers we were running for a large bank in the UK, not just in terms of the security aspects and the efficiency aspects, but really in changing the nature of that conversation that took place between the human and the agent. It's no word of a lie that as I was walking out of a Glasgow contact centre one wet and windy November night, somebody I'd never met before in my life stopped me and said that I had changed her life. Now, I still think that's a bit of an exaggeration, but honestly, she didn't come to work every day to get people to prove who they are. She came to help them solve their problems. And by taking the security process out of the way, voice biometrics was able to do that. Now, I would fully have expected that, having seen how powerful and impactful it was, that everyone would be adopting this technology, and therefore I moved on to look at other things. But when I came back 5 years later to this field, really we hadn't really moved on at all. And I think there's a couple of different factors from that you need to think about. There's a set of demand side factors. What are the businesses, the enterprise, the organizations looking for, and what's causing them to seek out these solutions? And then the other is a technology side. What are vendors like ValidSoft and others doing to move forward the technology? And I think there's been some really significant changes in both of those domains over the last 2 years, particularly with COVID, maybe slightly longer over the technology space. And I'm really optimistic as we go into 22 and beyond that actually this probably could be the year where voice biometrics particularly starts to get mainstream adoption outside those kind of large financial services organizations which we're all familiar with.
Yeah, fair enough. And as we know, financial firms, they're regulated, they're high risk, that's where the money is, that's where the robbers go, et cetera. Talk a little bit about, though, outside of that space, where else are we seeing some traction? I definitely, contact centers, there's conversation, everything from kind of agent fatigue through to more of what we're calling now a super agent, where they need to access high value information. Talk a little bit about some of the other areas that we're seeing that.
Yeah, still the fundamental challenges we see today are that the vast majority of organizations are still dependent on knowledge-based authentication. And that is really frustrating from a customer perspective, pretty time consuming from an agent perspective, and challenging to automate if you want to deliver self-service features, and pretty easy for fraudsters to compromise. And in those organizations which have high values at risk, like banks and financial service institutions, they ramped up those knowledge-based authentication processes to a point at which they were unsustainable, and they were forced to move to technologies like voice biometrics in order to address the imbalance that had taken place. I think as we look at businesses beyond financial services, we still see all of those same challenges. It's just the value of solving them isn't necessarily as great as it is for those businesses, and therefore the kind of cost and complexity of voice biometric solutions that were available on the market 2-3 years ago wasn't really appropriate for them. But as we look now at the market, where you can literally, in the console of some cloud contact center solutions, switch on a voice biometric solution and be up and running with a pilot tomorrow. There's no armies of consultants and engineers to make it happen. There's no 6-month project planning process to make it happen. You can switch it on and be up and running in a few short hours for dramatically lower running costs than these large financial service organizations have necessarily seen in the past. So I think that the fundamental problem of knowledge-based authentication is still there, and I'm really excited, and particularly because we all go through this process, it is rubbish, It's just a theatre. It's just theatrics. You know this process isn't adding any value to the security of your call. The agent knows it's not adding any value to the security of the call, yet we still all do this dance. It's frustrating, and it's a bit ludicrous in the 21st century to be doing this.
I've heard the same words applied to airport security. Sometimes appears like theatrics.
There's a concept known as security theatre, and that's where you do things that appear like security in order to provide reassurance and confidence. And some of those checks you see at the airport are really security theatre. If no one checked anyone's bags before you got on a plane, you wouldn't get on the plane. Current security processes in the enterprise, and particularly in contact centres, I think they're more like a security farce. Both parties know that this isn't adding any security value, yet we still pretend that it is and carry on regardless. So yes, interesting point.
And at the same time, real fraud losses are ramping up. We're seeing, both under NDA and in the press, more and more and more. So it's a substantial attack surface, right? The contact center, there's a lot of valuable data there. I'm not asking you to give away all your free consulting advice, because I know you consult with Fortune 500 and Global 2000 firms. But if you're advising an organization who might have taken a pass at voice biometrics prior, maybe they're reinvigorating their look at that, what are just a couple questions they should be asking?
For many organizations, this technology is not new. It's been around for 50 or so years. But a couple of fundamental things have changed in the last couple of years that really change the cost-benefit analysis for an organization. The first is computational power. It reached a point where it's near infinite for this purpose. We now have contact centers delivered on modern IP networks, and the cost of integration is therefore lower. But then when you add to that the improvements that have taken place in the underlying technology, we're at a point with accuracy now where it wouldn't necessarily have a material impact on customer outcomes. It is so much better than the technology that many organizations tested or piloted 10 years ago. It's like night and day. And not only on the accuracy front, but the amount of audio you actually need to achieve those levels of accuracy is also dramatically lower. I remember when first implementations of this technology, we'd be talking about having a 15-20 second conversation with a customer before we could authenticate them. But now we can do it in the 2 or 3 seconds that a customer might provide to a voice assistant or an IVR, enabling authentication far more natural conversational manner up front, and therefore enabling far more automation opportunities for the enterprise. It really has changed dramatically in the last couple of years, and I think for those reasons the cost benefit equation has just kind of completely rebalanced, and any organization that discounted it in the past for complexity or cost reasons really needs to come back at it, particularly when you then on the other side what's really happening on the benefits, because Some of those same organizations know they've got problems with knowledge-based authentication, and they've done things like implementing SMS two-factor authentication. And I think what we've found is that whilst those did provide like kind of a short-term boost in security, they did that at the cost of a significant detriment to customer usability and in some cases efficiency. They're not cheap, they're not easy to maintain. But now the fraudsters are catching up. The number of two-factor phishing schemes we see available now is just unprecedented. They're kind of back to as bad as knowledge-based authentication in some industries because of the weaknesses in the way in which it's been implemented and fundamentally the approach.
I think there was a news article recently that at least one organization in Singapore was impacted by that type of approach. So it's the real deal. It's making headlines. So certainly of concern. One of the things that comes up are things like synthetic voice replay attacks, things of that nature. Can you talk anything about your thoughts around, like, is the kind of the defense technology keeping up with the attackers? I know that's always a cat and mouse game for many, many years. It has been, but can you talk about that? How fast are we moving down the path?
With all of these kind of challenges, you need to take a step back and think about the overall risk that an organization's exposed to. And whilst the press and the media love to chase these high-profile vulnerabilities, the reality is that there are billions and billions of calls being authenticated today by people knowing nothing more than a date of birth and mother's maiden name. So I think we first need to get those kind of problems into perspective. And then the second is that we know over time there's been an unrealistic expectation of perfect security. I can't remember who said it exactly, but the most perfectly secure system is completely unusable. So we need to find ways in which we balance appropriate levels of security with usability and for the risk that's associated with them. And if we look particularly at the challenge around synthetic voice and the way in which voice biometrics might be vulnerable to that, the science is clear. It is a theoretical vulnerability. But I think when you then look at how that might be exploited realistically by a fraudster, and you look at actually the cost and complexity of developing a synthetic voice in order to bypass these systems, when many organizations are still employing knowledge-based authentication, they have employees who need nothing more than a password or nothing more than a date of birth to reset a password. It's just significantly easier to target enterprises like using all of these other technologies. That said, then we do have a range of defenses for it, and those defenses are improving at a rate similar to the level of attack. And I think you also then have to remember that the primary reason these technologies, the synthetic voice particularly, is being developed is to support applications like this in media and entertainment, where I've got a million pound a day actress who I just need to re-record one bit of voice. And it's cheaper for me to have a synthetic voice made of her and re-record her dialogue than it is to get her back into the studio or to pull her off the last film. That means that these technologies are really being optimized for that use case. And that's a very different one to the one we're looking at. So they're being optimized to sound like the actress or the actor or the person to a human ear. They're not being optimized for the cases we're looking at, which is the broader set of features which we use for authentication and personalization.
Thanks for that. Great. Well, I do want to take a few questions. We meant for this to be a fairly short session. We're going to do a series of these. We want to respect people's times, but I do want to handle some questions that have come in. There's a growing thought around this concept of a trusted agent in the contact center. Can you talk a little bit about that? What does that mean to you? What does that look like?
Putting my contact center hat of the past on, there was nothing more energizing but also stressful than sitting on a contact center floor. And as a leader, as a manager, you operate in a very particular way. You can see all of the people who work for you. There are people walking between desks, and the environment is pretty secure. Depending on the organizations you work for, there may be clear desk policies, stuff shredded, and you're not allowed to take notes. But that's obviously completely changed now with COVID and remote working. And there's no doubt that the vast majority of agents are not going back to physical call centers. They're going back occasionally. And that creates a whole host of new risks for the enterprise that they really need to think about and evaluate. And I think that's where this trusted agent concept comes from. We spent a long time making sure that the customer who we're speaking to on the phone is who they claim to be. But from an organization perspective, I probably also need to make sure that the person speaking to my customer, accessing my systems, is the person who I want it to be, or is the person who it should be. And this issue is exponentially greater when we think about regulated industries, and then when we think about how those might be outsourced in the future. And I think that's where trusted agents are probably going to see their first big opportunities in terms of authenticating the agent continuously as they're having a conversation with your customers. But I think there are opportunities beyond that. I think of almost the Uberization of contact centers, where you might train an agent or qualify an agent to do your particular thing, but you might only need them for a couple of hours a week or a month. And they may be in a completely different location. And therefore, being able to be sure that it is the person you have trained who is meeting your quality standards, who has the right background checks, who is accessing your data and is speaking to your customers on your behalf is an incredibly important capability. By the time you've done all the work to authenticate a customer using voice biometrics, it's not a lot harder to start authenticating the agent. So I do see a number of organizations demanding this right now, and I would expect in the near term for it to be from a far wider range as well.
Okay, thank you. So we did get a question around deep fakes. I think you covered synthetic voice, and although there are some differences, do you want to just touch on deep fake quickly?
It's really hard to know what's going on in the wild, but there have been a couple of attacks that have been ascribed to deep fake situations. One very high profile one where allegedly a German CEO of a UK-based subsidiary called his UK CEO and asked him to transfer some funds. And allegedly that was a deep fake voice that had been gathered using this person's audio from YouTube and elsewhere. But in practice, no recordings of that call exist. No attempt was made to authenticate that using biometrics. So it's very hard to know how some of our technologies would have stood up against that. Certainly when I'm talking to clients, I always talk about a risk assessment process. If you're dealing with the most high profile people whose audio is out there all over the place, easy to obtain, and you have significant value at risk, whether that be financial or reputational from being exposed in this way, then you should consider that the biometrics may not be the most appropriate primary authentication method for those customers. That said, most of the people in that domain are not interacting with our organizations all day, every day. They are using their assistants and third parties to interact with the vast majority of organizations. So I just don't see it as a huge risk in the short term. I think it's something we need to keep on the horizon and continue to monitor. I don't see it as a reason not to do this. It's still significantly better than asking people their mother's maiden name and date of birth.
Nice. Okay, great. We have time for one more quick question and answer, and then I want to go to a kind of exciting thing that you said we could preview for you. What other words of wisdom do you have in the age of voice for folks that are really evaluating this stuff?
The most exciting innovation and opportunity of the last few years has been that reduction in the amount of audio that we need to authenticate people. I think if you looked at the past and some of the earlier implementations of this technology, they are highly dependent on what we call text-dependent authentication. And really that's not a lot better than a password, because from a customer perspective, I'm phoning up an organization, I've got an intent, I want to have it resolved, and then you ask me to say my voice is my password or something similar. Now, whilst it is an effective technology, being able to ask customers why they're calling and who they are far more consistent with the kind of experience that many organizations want to do, far more consistent with a normal conversation that a human might have, and therefore likely to lead to far greater adoptions of voice assistance technology, and therefore improve the efficiency of our contact centers and agents. And I think it's therefore the opportunity for voice biometrics to use those very short utterances we receive from automated systems and authenticating customers with high confidence, and then enabling a far more self-service conversational journey. I think that's really the most exciting opportunity, and we already have a couple of proof points out there to talk about. So I'm really excited to see that opportunity develop and get these active security processes out of the way as well.
Great stuff. Great stuff. Okay, so with your permission, may I preview and show something that you're excited about? Matt, what is this?
Wow, okay. I've been doing this for 10 years now, and I sit in a very interesting space between vendors and end users. So if you think about the enterprise itself, the call centers, contact centers, the people in those organizations, they approach this and they do this once. But I'm in a very privileged position where I get to do this many times with many different organizations. And that's really enabled me to take a step back and look at what are the principles behind making security better, quicker, easier for call centers. And as a result of that, I've distilled most of that experience into this book, Unlock Your Call Center, a proven way to upgrade security, efficiency, and caller experience, which will be published imminently within weeks of speaking now. And really it's aimed to give a step-by-step guide to call center leaders of all sorts, whether that's in technology or business or operations or customer experience, to walk them through understanding how they're doing today, what they should be thinking about doing in the future, and then how to successfully implement that. Also going live today is our website, unlockyourcallcenter.com, both with US and UK English spellings available, although the book will be in UK English, apologies. If you go to that website today, you can get a free chapter sent to you, a free preview chapter sent to you very shortly, and we'll update you as soon as the book is available. So it'd be great to see some of you over there.
Okay, well, I want to thank you very much, Matt, for sharing your wisdom. We'll come back again and talk again in a bit. We'd love to hear from you. And also, we are standing up on our own newsletter soon. So if you want to let us know what your email is, we're happy to subscribe you to that. But again, thank you so much to everyone for joining and taking time from your busy schedules. We'll chat again soon. And Matt, thanks again for your time as well.